dive into today's big story, and it is tomorrow's schedule. 5 games on the docket, 2 games in the early window. Big noon is the Bucks and Hawks. We have Indiana and Rutgers here on the Big Ten Network. Midday window features first place Purdue in Madison, and we've got Northwestern visiting Maryland as well. And the Gophers and Nittany Lions will meet in prime time at Beaver Stadium. Let's start there. You got 2 teams trying to bounce back from disappointing losses. Joshua, some uncertainty at quarterback, particularly with the Gophers. What kind of stands out as you analyze this game?
Yeah, I mean, 2 weeks ago, the conversation about this game was totally different. We had a lot more momentum on either side for either program. And right now, there are many questions, like you just said. I think for Minnesota, Tanner Morgan's status obviously is going to be a big one. But even when he was in the game a week ago against Illinois, they struggled to throw the football. And I think for Minnesota, as good as Mo Ibrahim is and in the way that he has been able to run the football, it's imperative to have a pass game. You have to be able to have at least some semblance of balance to your attack, and especially when you start to get behind in football games. Minnesota just didn't have that. And I think there are issues defensively, and I've mentioned the lack of reps this year. I think it's bigger than that after diving into the tape. You can see guys that were getting displaced out of gaps. I think just from a philosophical, schematic standpoint, they had a hard time getting the numbers into the box when they needed to defend Illinois' run game. So for them, making that adjustment, I think is going to be big. But you flip it over to the Penn State side, and they've got 1 loss this year, and it feels a little bit like doomsday.
Yeah.
Still the 16th ranked team in the country. Like I just said, 1 loss, but it was the way that they lost that I think set off the alarms for all of us. Being dominated on either side in the trenches is never a way that you want to go down. And now, again, you have a question of Penn State offensively. Sean Clifford was not effective throwing the football. They, as a team, outside of 1 long run, could not run the football at all. And this Penn State defense, which I was extremely high on, and one of the reasons was because of their athleticism, got bullied up front, and I think that was something we maybe could have predicted just by the way that they've recruited body types. When the runs got to the 2nd and 3rd level, guys were getting run by, and that is something I didn't expect out of this Penn State defense. So I said this on Saturday, and I still believe it after watching the tape throughout the week, is Penn State has more questions right now to answer than anybody thought they would have, and I'm not sure that they're going to have the answers to those questions in time to get it fixed before they head into this game and then even a week from now when they play Ohio State.
Interesting. So, I mean, Minnesota's got a ton of questions, right? Not the least of which is Tanner Morgan, right? Kaliakmanis came in and threw as many to the other team as he did to his own team.
Yeah.
So that's an issue. It's unclear whether it would be him or Cole Kramer, and PJ Fleck went through that a little bit this week. But either way, I mean, Tanner Morgan's kind of the straw that stirs the drink.
Totally agree.
There. I mean, to me, if you don't have the threat of the pass game for Minnesota, I mean, I think it's easy to look at the tape of what Michigan did to Penn State and say, well, we'll just run it down their throat. But if you don't have the threat of the pass game, you're not going to be able to do anything resembling that, no matter how good Mo Ibrahim is.
Yeah, and that would be my mentality for Penn State. Like, I'm going to load the box, overload it, and dare them to throw the football down the field. And Penn State, you feel like you got guys who can match up on the edges with what Minnesota has at wide receiver. There are 2 approaches I would take for Minnesota in terms of getting the pass game together. Is can you find ways to use the pass game as an extension of your run game? So quick screens, swing passes out to Mo Ibrahim, things that maybe develop behind the line of scrimmage, but it gets the ball out there on the edges and it spaces out the defense horizontally. Number 2 is you've got Brevin Spanford, who is a 6'7", 280-pound freak of nature athlete. Can you find schemes and concepts that can isolate him and just feed him the ball? I mean, this guy's going to be able to win 50-50. He's going to be able to take a pounding if the game becomes physical with him catching the football. I would find as many ways to try to get him the ball because, especially if it's going to be one of the quarterbacks who hasn't played a ton, a big tight end is one of the easiest targets to have out there.
I feel like we've been going to camp for a couple of years now and looking at him and just saying, wow, I mean, that guy could be such a mismatch for people. And especially with Chris Ottman-Bell out now, you have to look for other options in the pass game, and he'd certainly be one of them. You started your comments with this, and I kind of want to finish with this before we move on to another game. You mentioned Penn State and kind of, hey, they've only lost 1 game, and yet here we have the alarm bells going off. In some ways, does that feel justified? I mean, I think the challenge for Penn State is, hey, we are a traditionally great program, a program that talks about winning national championships, competing at the very top, not just of the Big Ten East, but of the national consciousness in college football. And they looked really far off from that against Michigan. And so I understand your point. It is just one loss.
Right.
And I still think they can have a really good year. But I feel like at Penn State, it's kind of measured by whether or not you're in that championship hunt. And it's hard. You'd have to squint really hard, Joshua, to look at that team and think that a week from now they'll be ready to beat Ohio State.
Yeah, and that's kind of what it is. It wasn't just the fact that they lost, but it was the way that they lost and who they lost to. In the offensive issues and running the football popped back up, and everybody thought that they had it solved. You have two really good young running backs. This offensive line looked like it was creating movement. That certainly is not the case right now. Offensively, also, the questions about Sean Clifford and can he get it done in the big moments pop back up. And I think it's unfair because he wasn't getting a lot of help from the other guys that were out there, but it's something that pops in. And then, like we said, defensively, they have recruited a certain body type to compete with the offenses that you see from Ohio State in this conference that maybe you see from Tennessee nationally, right? Offenses that do a lot of movement. They use the full length and width of the field. And when you play a team like Michigan who wants to box you in tight and mash you off the line of scrimmage, they struggle. And it's this narrative now, too, about how do you perform against top 10 opponents? And Penn State hasn't done well against top 10 opponents in a while. And so I think that's why the alarm bells are sounding so loudly.
Yep, and I think it's fair. I mean, the only way to stop them from sounding is to play really well here these next couple of weeks.
Got some opportunities.
These are big games.
They are.
And again, you get a Minnesota team that is potentially shorthanded, that is a little wounded itself, two straight losses after winning 7 in a row. Really interesting game. I think there's a ton at stake for both teams there. What about Iowa and Ohio State? We have been talking about this all week, and it is kind of this strength against strength. It is the best scoring offense in the country. It's the number 3 scoring defense in the country. And I think whether or not you believe Iowa is good enough to beat Ohio State, and we can talk about whether or not you do, I do think it's a really good measuring stick for the Buckeyes either way, this notion of playing against a really elite defense. And I don't think there's any disputing that it's an elite defense, regardless of what you think of their offense, which isn't very good. And so do we learn something about Ohio State, even if this game isn't competitive in the sense that you think they might lose it at some point?
Yes, I think we learn about maturity and patience from this Ohio State team. So maturity would be players going out there, and if they're not hitting the home runs, they're not getting frustrated. Maybe you don't get as many shots at possessing the football as you would like. You don't get frustrated. You have to punt the ball in situations where you typically feel like you can move it down the field. You don't get frustrated. I would start there, but patience is both with the players and with this Ohio State offensive coaching staff, and Ryan Day in particular. And I think we all agree that he is top 2 best play calling head coaches in the country. I look at Texas and Steve Sarkisian and what he's done there. I think it's great. But Ryan Day is absolutely one of the best at doing it. But his patience is going to be tested because he's going to have to rely on a run game, and it's not always going to be big hits there. And this Iowa defense is structured where they play a lot of quarters. They keep 2 safeties up high, so you have to throw the football in front of them. So if Ohio State's players can get catch and runs, then maybe you get some of the big plays. But a lot of times it's going to be you throw the football, Iowa's defense is rallying, they're making a tackle, and you're lining up, and you have to do it again. You have to earn your way down the football field. And for an offense that's so used to being able to get chunks of yards at a time, it might not be available. So you can't get impatient with the way that you scripted up the game, and I think that's going to be big for Ohio State. But I also believe that there can come a point in this football game where Ohio State's offense has that patience and they really lean into the things that they desire to do coming into the game, and it'll be too much for Iowa to handle defensively because Ohio State has so many guys they can throw at them. So that'll be kind of the battle when Ohio State has the football.
And I think it's interesting. I think back a little bit to the Notre Dame game where that was the best defense that they have faced to this point. I think we both believe Iowa is a better defense than Notre Dame, although Notre Dame is very good. But they were patient, right? They did kind of allow the game to flow, and then at the end, they essentially ran the ball down Notre Dame's throat for the touchdown that clinched the game. So I think they proved to us from the outset that this is a little bit different team, but this will be an even sterner test of that. What about on the other side? I mean, Iowa has been so challenged offensively. They're last in the nation in total offense. I mean, it's just crazy to think how much they have struggled this year just with moving the ball, scoring, right?
Been tough.
There's 7 offensive touchdowns.
Yes.
This year, Ohio State has 41. I mean, the gulf is overwhelming.
Yeah.
What do you think there in terms of Iowa and coming off a bye and kind of whether or not you can fit everything together a little bit here?
Yeah, I think the worst thing that could happen for Ohio State is they play a bad game defensively, because there's been a lot of conversation about Jim Knowles coming in and reshaping the defense, and now statistically in the top 10 of total defense, I believe, top 10 of scoring defense as well. So a lot of people are feeling the momentum building. And if you have a poor performance against an offense that is as lethargic as Iowa's, that takes all of the momentum out of it. And you're heading into a game against the Penn State team the week after. So it's about a build process here. But I mentioned this when I was in studio on Tuesday, and I firmly believe it, that if Iowa's going to have success, they can create mismatches out of 12 personnel with the law firm of Laporta and Lachey. Those 2 tight ends are 2 of the best around. Sam Laporta could be the best tight end nationally when it's all said and done. But with this 3-safety Ohio State defense, do you think that there's an opportunity that you can use the size advantage of the tight ends, where they're probably going to be matched up against one of the safeties at some point or another in that game? And I think if they can get those connections, and I mentioned this earlier with Minnesota, but it's a big, easy target to hit, typically over the middle of the field, so it's an easy pass. I would go to that first offensively, but if they can't get past that, I'm not exactly sure they have the answers to move the ball in this game.
I was going to figure out a way to protect, too. Spencer Petras has been pressured on 39% of his dropbacks.
Feels a little bit high.
It is high, and Ohio State is 3rd in the nation in pressure percentage this year. So that feels like a tough combination here for the Hawkeyes. We look at the Big Ten East. The Bucs are, of course, on top, along with Michigan. Obviously, they're a half game back, but even in the loss column. Those 2 are 2 of the 9 remaining unbeatens in the nation, all of them in power conferences. Penn State, as we mentioned, suffered its first loss last week against the Wolverines. And as we also mentioned, they host Ohio State next week. So do you believe this to be a 2-team race, or do you think Penn State can kind of get back into it, and with that chance next week against Ohio State could throw this thing into potentially 3 teams and we get into tiebreakers and all that fun stuff?
2-team race.
2-team race.
I truly believe that. And I think at this juncture, from what I've seen out of both Ohio State and Michigan, that they are both national title contenders this year. And looking around the landscape of college football, I think that'd be supported. And the gap that we thought might have existed between Ohio State and Michigan, with all the losses that Michigan had in the offseason and new coordinators and everything else, the margin is very thin between these 2 teams. And I think depending on which side of the bed you wake up on, you can make an argument that one or the other is the best in the conference. And I truly believe that is a good thing for our conference, because, these are 2 fun teams to watch with great personalities and a lot of talent out there. But Michigan now has a chance to take a deep breath. And it's been kind of a sprint here at the beginning of the year. You had a young quarterback. You're trying to figure out how you can use him within game plan. You got 2 newer coordinators on offense. You've got a new defensive coordinator. This is a great time to take a break. A lot of teams talk about having momentum and then having that bye week. And I think for this Michigan team, the momentum is going to be there after the bye week, and especially with the matchup that they're going to have coming out of it. So the race at the top, it's certainly Ohio State, Michigan, and then a gap. And I'll be very curious to see what wrinkles Michigan can bring out to kind of differentiate themselves down the stretch here.
So I'm with you. I don't see either one of them losing before that game.
I don't either.
And that would be amazing, right? I mean, it would be incredible.
Absolutely
Obviously, they've met once in the last 45 years where both were undefeated. It was the famous 1-2 game in 2006.
Yeah.
Whether or not they'd be 1-2, who knows? Obviously, that's premised on Georgia losing and some other stuff there. But either way, it'd be a circus.
It'd be a battle.
It would be unreal. So we can only hope. At the Big Ten West, heading into the weekend, threatening to become a 2-team race as well. Purdue and Illinois are both 3-1. Nebraska's 2-2, but remember they've already dropped one to the Boilers, and 1-2 Iowa has fallen to Illinois. Minnesota at 1-2 has lost to both the Illini and the Boilermakers. Wisconsin is in the basement at 1-3, and so we have first place against last place tomorrow. Purdue against Wisconsin. Purdue remarkably has lost 15 straight games.
Yeah.
to the Badgers. So let's kind of take it from that perspective. What would it take for Purdue to break through and end that long skid?
Well, I think it would take the offensive balance that we have seen in these last few weeks. And it's not that they're going to be split right down the middle, rushing and passing. It's the fact that now the run game is a true threat for this Purdue team. And we haven't seen that in quite a while. And it's been really fun to watch, too. Now, because this offense has always been very creative and they've been able to make great plays, but now having the diversity between the run and the pass provides for some really good football. So I think it starts there. Number two, I think this is a pretty good matchup for Purdue's defense with what Wisconsin likes to be offensively. It's they're more in tighter formations, right. Not certainly spreading it out and trying to throw it all over the field. And this is a Purdue team that we have seen get burned when teams do exactly that, when they spread it out, when they want to throw the ball around the yard. So they can get numbers in the box so they can defend against Braylon Allen in this run game, which has really been lethargic for Wisconsin, but also they can be confident in putting their guys on islands one-on-one, which they have done all year, sometimes to their own peril. So I think Purdue has all of the makings for this to be a victory, but in the critical situations now, can they execute? Can the play come in? Everybody knows what they're supposed to do. The guys on the field execute it without mistakes and get out of there.
Yeah, it feels like Purdue's defense is constructed well to slow down Wisconsin because, as you say, Wisconsin really not a big play threat in terms of throwing the ball, and Purdue's a really good run defense. The flip side is true as well. It feels like Purdue's offense is well constructed to take advantage of the liabilities of Wisconsin's defense. I mean, they are 9th in the Big Ten in passing efficiency defense. They've given up 22 completions of 25 yards or longer. That is the most in the Big Ten. I mean, it's staggering to think of Wisconsin, who we traditionally think is being great defensively, and the change, Sharon and I were talking about this yesterday, I mean, the change at Wisconsin, it feels like was made mostly because of offense, although I think there's some recruiting stuff and just some systemic stuff that goes into it as well. I mean, obviously defense has been the strength of this program here for years, but this is not a great defense, kind of a middle-of-the-road one at best.
Yeah, and it probably doesn't help that Jim Leonhard now has other things on his plate as the interim head coach. He can't be in the defensive meeting room all day trying to figure out answers to correct up what some of their issues are. But you're right, this is a totally uncharacteristic defense for Wisconsin. And part of it is youth. I think that, losing all the starters that they did, 9 guys, is tough. But the other part of it is these guys just, they don't look like they're in sync, and they don't look very confident out there on the football field. It's something that they're going to have to get sorted out. And you mentioned this matchup right here. Typically, we think of Wisconsin as a team who's going to pressure the quarterback. They're going to play really good coverage in the back end, even take the football away. I mean, these Purdue guys, if they start hitting on some of these big plays early, they can pile on in this matchup, and that's the scary thing for Wisconsin.
Indeed, Wisconsin trying to avoid yet another home loss, and Purdue trying to start 3-0 on the road in conference play for the first time since 1980. It's been a while.
It's a little while
since the Boilermakers have played like this away from Ross-Ade. So here's what's happening the rest of the way in the Big Ten West in terms of the key games. Barring any significant upsets between now and then, the biggest one by far will be that game November the 12th in Champaign when Illinois hosts Purdue. Illini have the toughest remaining crossover of the teams in the hunt as they visit Michigan on the 19th of next month. 2 teams in this race, in your opinion, is this parallel the East, or is there someone else who can get back into it?
Yeah, I mean, Nebraska, for some reason, is just sitting right there in the back of my mind. And, the changes that they've made, I think, really reinvigorated that program. Mickey Joseph, he goes out there, he lets Mark Whipple do what he does with the offense, and those guys are really creative. Trey Palmer, that guy is going to be a problem for secondaries regardless. Right. And as long as they don't turn the football over, that seems to me like an offense that can present a lot of challenges. And I think that they have made improvements defensively by just simplifying what they're doing. Can they consistently get the victories? I'm not sure about that. But one thing I do know is that they've looked pretty good in their crossover games, which is wild because we always think about in the West, you got to be able to get the crossover games. The issue is that they haven't won the division game. So, they need to get that part of it figured out. But to me, they're still kind of lurking right there. They present some issues. They've got some personnel that's extremely challenging, and you never know what can happen. I'm not saying it's going to, but for some reason, they're just sitting right there for me to think about.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't see that at all.
Yeah.
All
right, well.
Yeah. But look, they were play away basically from beating Purdue, and so I understand. But now they've lost a tiebreaker to Purdue. Yeah, I don't know.
Go on a run here at the end of the year.
Yeah,
guys, a lot of guys with nothing to lose right now.
That is for sure.
So it's a dangerous spot to be in, and I go back to this idea. And when Scott Frost got fired, there were people talking about the roster for Nebraska being in disarray, and I'd never agreed with that. And now you're seeing offensively. I mean, we talked about Palmer and Casey Thompson, but they got a couple of factors in the run game as well that can give you some issues. I just look at it from a defensive standpoint of they would keep me really off balance, and that is dangerous, especially when you're looking down the West where there aren't a lot of teams that can play catch-up.
How do you separate Illinois and Purdue? Who do you think's better right now?
Well, I think Illinois is the most complete team in that division, so I would give them the nod there. Their ability to run the football, and Chase Brown has been a volume back, and I think part of their bye-week paradigm now is, can we get our running back room fully healthy and find ways to take a little bit of the load off of Chase Brown. But they run the football really well. Tommy DeVito has been great in the pass game. This is a layered offensive approach in terms of play calling and design, which bodes well for them down the line because there are so many wrinkles.
What do you mean by layered?
So layered as in they ran the wheel route that they threw to Chase Brown a couple of times without throwing it to him just to see it develop. And then the one that they hit, he was wide open. Illinois ran a reverse, and then they had a reverse pass off of that. They didn't hit the reverse pass, but you can see that the concepts build upon one another, and they've probably still got some more concepts that they can roll out there that they haven't showed yet. And when you're playing, I'm talking down the line here, but like a team like Michigan, you're going to want to have the full complement ready, so you can tell that they're layering. Their defense, I mean, the defensive line has been great, holding up in the trenches. I love the way that their linebackers are playing. Those guys are aggressive, and they're smart too. And you can tell that because they are guys who anticipate the snap count on their blitzes. I mean, there have been a couple of plays where I'm like, that's real close, but they do it constantly, so you know that it's something that they're focused on. Somebody's given them great tips on that. And then their secondary has been just really good. Tight coverage, they challenge every throw, but also those guys will go out and hit somebody. So I think Illinois is the team in the West as it is right now.
Yeah, that's just crazy how good the pass defense is. Teams compete well under 45% against them. It's just
the last few years, this is an awful defense for Illinois. It was just not good, and now all of a sudden you're looking at the best.
Well, end of last year got pretty good.
It got better,
yeah.
but I mean, we're looking at the best scoring defense in the nation right now, and I'm not sure any of us anticipated that.
How cool would it be either Illinois or Purdue in Indy? I mean, it's eminently drivable for both fan bases. Obviously, it's in the heart of Purdue's fan base and very close for Illinois. They've never been there before. It would be
a lot of people who would want to make that trip to Indy to get there. So.
No doubt. It would be quite a scene if either team makes it.